Audubon Ballroom, Washington Heights, New York, February 21, 1965, 3:10 p.m. Malcolm X stood at the podium before 400 people, beginning his speech to the Organization of Afro-American Unity. He wore a dark suit. His wife Betty and their 4 daughters sat in the third row. The room was warm, crowded, electric with the tension that always surrounded Malcolm now. He opened his mouth to say, "Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you." Before the words fully formed, chaos erupted. A scuffle in the crowd, someone shouting, a smoke bomb, confusion, then gunfire. The first shot hit Malcolm in the chest. He staggered backward, hands reaching for nothing. More shots, 16 bullets in total from at least 3 different guns. Shotgun, pistols, close range, execution. Malcolm fell. Betty screamed. The crowd scattered, and in that moment, 7 days of running came to an end. 7 nights of sleeping in different houses, knocking on different doors, asking the same question, "Can I stay here tonight? They're coming for me." For 7 days, Malcolm had been a ghost in his own city, moving from safe house to safe house, never sleeping in the same place twice, exhausted, paranoid, but alive. On the 8th day, he made a decision that everyone who loved him begged him not to make. He went home. He slept in his own bed, he woke up with his family, and he went to give a speech. This is the story of those 7 days and the choice that ended them. February 14, 1965, Day 1, Malcolm X sat in his office at the OAAU headquarters in Harlem reading death threats. They arrived daily now, letters, phone calls, messages passed through intermediaries, some from the Nation of Islam, the organization he'd left a year earlier, some from government agents who saw him as a threat, some from anonymous cowards who just wanted to see him dead. Most were vague. "You won't live to see spring. We're watching you. Every breath you take is borrowed time." But the one Malcolm read on February 14 was different, specific. "We know where you sleep. We know what time you leave in the morning. We know the route you drive. You have 7 days." Malcolm set the letter down. His hands were steady, but his mind was calculating. 7 days until what? Until they acted. Or 7 days as a countdown, ending on February 21 when he was scheduled to speak at the Audubon Ballroom. Malcolm had survived threats before. He'd been shot at. His home had been firebombed. Just a week earlier, on February 14, while his family slept inside, Betty and the children had barely escaped. The house was destroyed, everything they owned gone. Malcolm had moved his family to a hotel, but where could he move himself? He couldn't go to a hotel, too exposed, couldn't stay with family, too dangerous for them, couldn't go to OAAU headquarters, too obvious. That night, Malcolm made the first call. To James Shabazz, no relation to Betty, a longtime supporter who lived in the Bronx. "Brother James, I need a place to stay tonight, just tonight. I'll explain later." James didn't ask questions. "Come." Day 1 night, Malcolm slept on James Shabazz's couch in a small apartment in the South Bronx. He arrived after midnight, carrying nothing but a briefcase with documents and a change of clothes. James's wife made him tea. They didn't talk much. Malcolm was too exhausted for conversation. He lay on the couch fully clothed, shoes off, eyes open, listening to the sounds of the building. Every footstep in the hallway made him tense. Every car door slamming outside pulled him back from the edge of sleep. He dozed for maybe 3 hours. Shallow, fractured sleep full of images he couldn't quite remember when he woke. At 5 a.m. he was up. He thanked James, left before the sun rose, and went to a diner in Harlem where he knew the owner. He sat in the back booth, drinking coffee, reading the newspaper, trying to look normal. But everyone who saw Malcolm that morning said the same thing later. He looked haunted, like a man running from something he couldn't outrun. February 15, 1965, Day 2, Malcolm spent the day moving between meetings. An interview with a journalist, a planning session for the Audubon speech, calls to contacts in Africa about potential alliances. He functioned, he performed competence, but beneath it, his mind was working on a different problem. Where do I sleep tonight? He couldn't repeat the same house. If someone was watching, they'd learn his pattern. He needed to be unpredictable. That night he called a man named Benjamin Karim, a former Nation of Islam minister who'd followed Malcolm after the split. "Benjamin, I need a favor. Don't ask why. I just need a place to sleep tonight." Benjamin lived in Queens with his wife and 2 children. They gave Malcolm their bedroom. He refused at first. They insisted. Malcolm slept maybe 4 hours. He woke in the middle of the night to the sound of a child crying. For a moment, disoriented. The dark, he thought it was one of his daughters. The wave of guilt that hit him was physical. His family was in a hotel because their home had been firebombed. His daughters were scared. Betty was exhausted, trying to hold everything together. and Malcolm was running, sleeping on strangers' couches, bringing danger to everyone who helped him. But what choice did he have? Stop running and die? Stop speaking and let them win? There was no good option. Only survival until he could figure out what came next. February 16, 1965, Day 3. The paranoia was getting worse. Malcolm noticed cars that seemed to follow him, faces that appeared in multiple locations. He didn't know if it was real or if exhaustion was distorting his perception. Probably both. He spoke to Alex Haley, the journalist writing his autobiography that afternoon. Haley later said Malcolm seemed more tense than I'd ever seen him, like a man who knew something I didn't. That night, Malcolm stayed with a woman named Sister Khadija, a member of the OAAU who lived alone in Brooklyn. She was older, in her 60s, a widow who'd been involved in activism for decades. She made Malcolm dinner, refused to let him help clean up, made him sit while she talked about her late husband, about organizing in Harlem in the 1930s, about the long fight for dignity. Malcolm listened. For a few hours he forgot he was running. He slept in her spare room that night. 5 hours, better than the previous nights, but he woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of glass breaking somewhere in the building. Probably nothing. A bottle dropped, a window cracked by wind, but Malcolm was up, dressed, sitting in the dark. For 2 hours until sunrise, convinced they'd found him. February 17, 1965, Day 4. Malcolm was unraveling, not visibly. He still showed up to meetings, still spoke with clarity and precision. But people close to him noticed small things, the way his eyes tracked every person who entered a room, the way he positioned himself with his back to walls, the way he flinched at sudden sounds. That night he stayed with a young couple, supporters of the OAIU, who lived in Harlem. They were honored to host him, terrified but honored. They gave him their bedroom. He insisted on sleeping on the floor. If they come, I don't want to be where they expect me to be. The couple stayed awake most of the night, watching their front door, listening for footsteps. Malcolm slept maybe 2 hours. He left before they woke up, just a note on the kitchen table. Thank you, forgive me. February 18, 1965, Day 5. Malcolm called a meeting of his closest advisors, told them he was getting serious threats, told them he might not make it to the Audubon speech on the 21st. Some advised him to cancel, to leave the country, to go into hiding until the danger passed. Malcolm refused. If I run, they win. If I cancel, I prove they can silence me with fear. I'm going to speak on Sunday, and I'm going to keep speaking until they stop me or I'm dead. The room went silent because everyone knew what "until I'm dead" meant. Malcolm wasn't being dramatic. He was stating a fact. That night he stayed with a man named Charles Kenyatta, a street organizer who ran with Malcolm during the early OAAU days. Charles lived in a one-room apartment above a barber shop. No heat, barely any furniture, but he gave Malcolm what he had. They stayed up talking until 2 a.m. Charles asked the question everyone wanted to ask but was afraid to. Why don't you carry a gun? Malcolm's answer was immediate. Because if I carry a gun, I'm admitting I'm afraid. And if I'm afraid, I can't do what I need to do. I have to walk into rooms like I'm not afraid to die. That's the only power I have left. February 19, 1965. Day 6. Malcolm was barely sleeping anymore. Maybe an hour here, 90 minutes there. His body was running on adrenaline and something deeper. A kind of fatalistic clarity. He knew how this ended. He'd known for months, maybe years. You don't challenge the Nation of Islam, the FBI, the CIA, and the entire structure of American white supremacy without accepting that you probably won't die of old age. That night he stayed with a family in the Bronx. Husband, wife, 3 kids. The oldest was 8. Malcolm sat with them at dinner, watched the kids laugh and play. For a moment he saw his own daughters, saw the life he was sacrificing for a cause that might not even remember his name. The family's oldest son asked Malcolm a question. Are you scared? The parents tensed, ready to scold the child for being inappropriate, but Malcolm answered honestly, yes, I'm scared. But being scared doesn't mean you stop. It means you understand what you're risking, and you do it anyway. He slept on their couch that night, woke at 4 a.m. from a nightmare he couldn't remember, sat in the dark until sunrise, watching the street through the window. February 20, 1965, Day 7. Malcolm was done running. That morning he called Betty at the hotel. I'm coming home tonight. I'm sleeping in our bed. I'm tired of running. If they want me, they'll find me anywhere. I'd rather spend my last night with you and the girls than hiding in someone's spare room. Betty begged him not to, told him to keep moving, stay unpredictable, stay alive. Malcolm's voice was quiet but firm. I can't live like this, and I won't teach our daughters that the right response to fear is to run forever. I'm coming home. That night, Malcolm X slept in his own bed for the first time in 7 days. Betty lay awake next to him, listening to him breathe, knowing tomorrow he'd go to the Audubon, knowing he wouldn't cancel, knowing something terrible was coming and being powerless to stop it. Malcolm slept deeply that night, the sleep of a man who'd made peace with his choice. At 6 a.m. he woke, kissed Betty, played with his daughters, made breakfast, acted like it was a normal Sunday, because what else could he do? February 21, 1965, day 8, Malcolm woke early. The house was quiet. Betty was still sleeping. The girls were still sleeping. For a moment, everything was normal, just a man in his home with his family. He made coffee, read the newspaper, watched the sunrise through the kitchen window. Around 10 a.m., Betty came downstairs. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? They'd said everything the night before. Around noon, Malcolm started getting ready. He put on his dark suit, his white shirt, his thin tie. He looked in the mirror, adjusted his glasses. He looked tired, older than 39, but determined. Betty watched him from the doorway. "You don't have to do this," Malcolm turned to her. "Yes, I do." They drove to the Audubon Ballroom together, Betty and the 4 girls. Malcolm drove in silence. When they arrived, the ballroom was already filling with people. 400 chairs, most occupied, supporters, followers, FBI informants, and 3 men with guns. Malcolm went backstage, reviewed his notes. He was going to talk about the OAAU's mission, about international alliances, about the difference between human rights and civil rights. At 3:05 p.m. he walked onto the stage. The crowd applauded. He stood at the podium, looked out at the faces, saw Betty and the girls in the 3rd row. He smiled at them. Then he began, "Assalamu alaikum." The scuffle started immediately, a disturbance in the crowd. Malcolm raised his hands, trying to calm the situation. Hold it, brothers." The first shot hit him in the chest, then the shotgun blast, then more pistol shots, 16 bullets in total. Malcolm fell backward, his arms spread wide. He hit the floor. The crowd scattered, screaming. Betty ran to him, her daughters crying behind her. She cradled his head. His eyes were open but already distant. He died before the ambulance arrived. 39 years old, 7 days of running. Ended by 8 minutes of violence. The aftermath was chaos. 3 men were arrested and convicted. Talmadge Hayer, Norman 3X Butler, Thomas 15X Johnson, all associated with the Nation of Islam. But questions remained. Were there other shooters? Did the FBI or NYPD allow it to happen? Were informants in the room who could have stopped it? The full truth never emerged. What did emerge were the stories of the 7 families who'd sheltered Malcolm during his final week. They all said the same thing. They felt honored, terrified, and haunted by guilt, because each of them had tried to convince Malcolm to stay one more night, to not go home, to not go to the Audubon, and Malcolm had thanked them, hugged them, and walked toward his death anyway, not because he wanted to die, but because he refused to let fear dictate his choices. Because he believed the message mattered more than the messenger, because he understood that movements need martyrs even when martyrs have families who need them alive. The legacy of Malcolm's final 7 days is complicated. Some see it as heroic, a man who knew death was coming and faced it with courage. Others see it as tragic, a man who could have lived, could have kept fighting if he just stayed in hiding. Both are true. Malcolm X could have run. He could have left the country, canceled the speech, gone underground, but that would have been a different kind of death, the death of his voice, the death of his mission, the death of the idea that black people could speak truth to power without apology. So he chose to speak, knowing the cost, knowing his daughters would grow up without a father, knowing Betty would raise them alone, knowing the movement would lose one of its most powerful voices. He chose to speak anyway, and that choice, more than any speech he gave, more than any debate he won, defines his legacy. Not the words, the willingness to stand when standing was dangerous, to show up when showing up meant death, to refuse fear even when fear was the rational response. In the years after Malcolm's assassination, the 7 families who sheltered him during his final week rarely spoke publicly about those nights. The weight of it was too heavy, the guilt too sharp. They'd each offered him safety, and he'd chosen danger, not because their safety wasn't real, but because safety without freedom was just a different kind of prison. And Malcolm X had already spent enough time in cages. He'd spent his final week free, running, yes, scared, yes, but free. Free to choose where he slept, who he trusted when he stopped running, free to decide that day 8 would be different, that he would go home, sleep in his own bed, wake up with his family, and do the work he believed in even if it killed him. It did kill him, 16 bullets, 400 witnesses, one death that shook the world, but before the bullets. Before the Audubon, before day 8, there were 7 days of a man refusing to disappear. 7 nights of knocking on doors and being welcomed. 7 dawns of waking up alive and choosing to keep going. That's the story no one tells. The paranoia, the exhaustion, the guilt of bringing danger to people who loved him. The humanity of a man reduced to a symbol. Malcolm X didn't die as an icon. He died as a father, a husband, a friend who'd asked for help and received it from people who knew they might be next. And when it was over, when the bullets stopped and the screams faded, what remained was a question every revolutionary has to answer. Is the cause worth your life? Malcolm answered yes, not because he wanted to die, but because the alternative, living in fear, silence, diminished, wasn't living at all. 7 days, 7 houses, 7 families who gave him shelter. And on day 8, Malcolm X walked into history, not because he was fearless, but because he was afraid and did it anyway.